Over the years, I have heard so much confusion about which edition of the code is referenced and enforced in different applications, and rightfully so, because it can be very confusing. So here's just one example of that. Here I have the 2021 edition of NFPA 101, the Life Safety Code. So we're going to design and construct according to the 2021 edition, right? And we should probably operate all existing buildings according to the 2021 edition because that's the latest version. Wrong. Just because it's printed and it's out and it's published doesn't mean that is what's referenced and enforced. In fact, we reference the 2012 edition of NFPA 101 in healthcare. That's right. We reference almost a 10-year code. And that's because that's what's been adopted by our regulatory agency, in this case, the Centers for Medicaid and Medicare Services, or CMS. And they didn't adopt this edition in 2012 when that edition hit the streets. They adopted it on July 5th of 2016. And so what that means is that any hospital with permitted construction drawings on or after July 5th of 2016 must abide by the 2012 edition of NFPA 101. And to complicate matters more, that might not necessarily be true in all cases, because the local authority having jurisdiction, let's say the fire department, they might enforce a code that is more stringent than the NFPA 101 Life Safety Code, like the International Building Code or the International Fire Code. That's actually a pretty often occurrence in that the local AHJ will have a more stringent requirement than the CMS adopted code, and that's what they enforce. You always go with the more stringent option. And there's another layer. The hospital, the owner, could decide to enforce above and beyond the code because, you guys, it's a minimum requirement. And so at any point, an owner could go above and beyond that standard for life safety or quality reasons, and oftentimes they do. Also, another wrinkle is that some standards are not equivocally enforced across each state. For example, the FGI guidelines, which specifically applies to healthcare, is adopted by not all states. I think it's like 42 states, and each state might have their own edition they've adopted. Some 2018, some 2014. It just kind of depends on the state. And by the way, Texas is a great example because they don't even observe the FGI guidelines. Also, the FGI guidelines references another standard, the ASHE/ANSI/ASHRAE standard 170, which is ventilation for healthcare facilities. It's referenced in the FGI guidelines. And whenever a code or a standard references another code, standard, or guideline, you always have to make sure that you're following the edition that they're referencing. And NFPA has its own chapter dedicated to doing just that. Also, I mentioned NFPA 101. We're currently enforcing the 2012 edition for current construction. Well, that doesn't mean that we're enforcing 2012 for all NFPA codes and standards. Some of them are 2010 or 11. It just really depends on that code and standard and which edition was adopted by CMS. Yes, it gets complicated very quickly. And so if you have, experience with this or any other input, I mentioned the 2012 edition because that's what was enforced and adopted in 2016 by CMS, but I didn't even touch on existing buildings, and those are really depending on whatever year was adopted, the year that it was built and constructed. So it gets, like I said, it's very layered. And I'd love to hear from you if you have any other clarifying points or experience, anything else that you want to tack onto the conversation. You can only cover so much in a few minutes. So please use this opportunity to continue the conversation. I'd love to hear from you in the comments below. Thanks, y'all.